Topic assigned for this week is a continuation of the previous week's talk, the caption being the Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, Islamic or Colonial. So this is the second talk in the same series, and we covered some basic and fundamental grounds in our initial talk, and we'll try and take it beyond this week. So, for beginners, it is neither Islamic, the Constitution of Pakistan, nor is it colonial in totality. It is a political document structured for the purposes of meeting with political objectives that may have existed when the Constitution was first drafted, and with amendments as they do keep changing and evolving today. This is a safe statement to make when the opening terms in the preamble of this Constitution declares that the sovereignty rests with Almighty Allah. Now this is a very, very major statement, and one that takes away the ability of any political force within a nation state to coerce people or cause political victimization on the grounds that there is political disagreement. So based on the preamble, where the sovereignty of this nation states rests with Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, we find that the entire document is dichotomous. And dichotomous to a point where nothing seems to be in consonance with what has been sought by Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, without getting intermingled with branded Islams and the rhetoric of clerics. All sects have a common God, have a common book, have a common prophet, have a common place of worship, the pivot around which the entire energy of the Ummah is required to move. So, the sectarian divide created by political forces based on the clerics is absolutely irrelevant. If you look at contemporary history right now, the concept of the introduction of Islam, starting from the time the Prophet declared the advent of Islam, his prophethood, on to Karbala, 62 odd years, is a very brief period. After that, we see about 1,000 years of monarchy, and post that period of monarchy, we see a world of colonialism and other man-made doctrines, be it communism, capitalism, socialism, or whatever other isms that you have. Essentially, if constitutions are meant to represent a benchmark for the making of law that can manage societies on an equitable plane, there can be no better document than the Quran itself as the constitution of any Islamic society. And underneath that umbrella can be statutes that can keep evolving as human civilization evolves, as material technology evolves, as our indulgences in seeking the truth evolve in time. So, we have to put into pointing out this dichotomous nature of the Constitution, so that we do not have a repetitive history of excesses in law, like we have had, where a jurist comes up and declares the law of necessity, where a journal rises up and breaches the law and prepares it and presents his own doctrine, violating the Constitution. You have civil bureaucrats and forcing you into accepting a situation of debt and your subservience to the financial regime of the colonists. I mean, these are nonsensical issues which have emerged, defying and denying all factors of the Constitution, whether it was the first or the second or the third Constitution with amendments. Because if the Constitution is supposed to represent a philosophical base, if it is supposed to represent an ideology, and this Constitution which we are following certainly does, then anything which is not in consonance with that ideology, with the philosophy that supports it, with the historical data of all the excesses caused thus far, these acts these omissions, these excesses are absolutely not permissible, and in whichever form they do exist today, they should be eliminated and forthwith. The opposing forces that restrict our compliance with our constitution, our compliance with our ideology, is the hegemonistic hold of a bunch of people that serve the larger agenda of the colonists. This is the fundamental point that has to be recognized, which is why this talk on the Constitution, that the Constitution is not being followed, the Constitution is being amended, the Constitution is being fiddled with, the Constitution, the spirit of the Constitution has been robbed because we have taken away from it the fundamentals of the ideology on the basis of which the Constitution was constructed, brought about, should be in place. When I talk about the people who are upholding the status quo, serving the interests of the colonists, I basically would like to point out at that default that does exist within the Constitution and that has been brought about in the Constitution, and which is serving as a curtain to be hide behind. I mean, look at the laws which protect the upholders of the status quo. Take the judiciary. The judiciary legally can question any citizen on aspects of contempt and can interpret his or her statement to be contemptuous. You take the civil bureaucracy, you have the same problem. They lean heavily on the laws of sedition and treason. Then you have the laws of blasphemy to protect the clerics who really have no place in Islam. And finally you have the army, which is often referred to as the establishment, the people with the gun. And they have a law. You have the army, and which is often referred to as the establishment, the people with the gun. And they have laws to protect their doings, which come under the laws for subversion. So, the taxpayer who takes care of the judiciary, the civil bureaucracy, the armed forces, and the parliamentarians in this country essentially does not have a say. So we are in denial of the Constitution because the people's power is not there. It is the power of a handful of servants of the people who are there to take decisions, make decisions, chart the course forward. And this course is detrimental to the people because, as we see the evidence in the budget, and as recently as maybe 2-3 days ago, in a report submitted by the UNDP again, that we are upholding the establishment comprising of the politicians, the army men, the judicial functionaries, the civil bureaucrats, yes, spending the predominant amount of our budget, preventing enterprise from a free hand to develop the country because their own economic vested interests is coming in the way. We have lived with this nonsense for over 7 decades, and it cannot be upheld because it is not logical, it is not sensible, and it cannot be subdued by any of these profit-taking players within these institutions, because it has also damaged these institutions. We must never forget that famous Chinese saying that the fish starts rotting from the head. So it is essential that we revert to our ideology. It is essential that the constitution that we uphold, and we are constitutionally bound to uphold, be followed across the board by all. It should not be a tool for suppressing people or for political victimization or for gagging voices, denying people the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression, the freedom of movement. So the club within the country of profit takers, and often absurdly referred to as stakeholders, must be dissolved. And that is the essential requirement of the constitution in place. That is the constitution which we are trying to uphold here in this talk. We will dwell upon the aspect of the sovereignty belonging to Allah, which in essence, in reality, by our faith, by the founding ideology of this nation state, is true, absolute, correct, in place. But by that yardstick, everybody from the president to a janitor employed under the umbrella of any government, provincial or federal, have to be defined as servants of the people. The equation in Pakistan is 2.6 million functionaries of the government, including the parliamentarians, and 221 million people. the hold on these 221 million people of the 2.6 is the breach of the constitution that is taking place. There cannot be a hold. The servants cannot hold their employers because it is their taxes that is keeping them in office. So they have to be essentially mandated for their job descriptions, every one of them. Every one of them has to be accountable. You cannot have the civil bureaucracy or part thereof absolved from audits, the army or the armed forces and parts thereof absolved from any audits. The office of the executive, the office of the judiciary as an institution, they cannot be absolved. They all have to be audited, and therefore there has to be a plan. A plan charting out the course for the development on all counts for the country, for the nation state. This plan cannot be based on the agendas of political forces or the feudal forces which exist within the country. They have to be equal across the board for every citizen of the country. You cannot have people discriminated with quotas. It is anti-Islamic. Nobody is more patriotic than another. The uniform we provide to chauffeurs, to guards, to people who are flyers, who are mariners, they carry with them a dignity of their indulgence, their profession. Any uniform which belongs to a certain cadre, i.e., let's take the uniform of a janitor, does not make him less patriotic than the uniform of, say, a general in the army. We cannot discriminate on this basis. This is another factor of non-compliance with the terms of the constitution taking place in the country. And this has to be checked. So when we look at this constitution and its dichotomous nature, and we talk, seek, demand the implementation of its cardinal principles, then we need transparency, we need audits, we need a new social contract where the job of our servants in office comprising the government are accountable to us the people without their ability to shut us up. It is also a demand and an essential demand of our religion on the constitution that we have put into place, we like to uphold, that we have to, absolutely have to, negate any or all aspects of a feudal structure in the society. It is merit first, merit next, merit last. It is merit and merit alone that makes a healthy society. Because corruption, which is the opposing force, has no energy. It is the lack of merit or the existence of merit in a social environment that determines the degree of corruption. And if we do not follow the Constitution in letter and in spirit, then we are promoting corruption right from the top. Because for the management of societies, after all, the Constitution is the fountainhead for both legislation, the following of law, and then the spirit. And there should be absolutely no two opinions about what the spirit of the Constitution represents. The spirit of the Constitution represents Islam. And Islam is not a political rhetoric confined to the terms of Riyasat-e-Madina. That was short-lived. Islam means unity, does not mean division. Means freedom, means liberties, means peace, and certainly, absolutely, certainly means the denial of all forms of oppression, and therefore we cannot be in the following of oppressors, the colonists, and anybody upholding that particular philosophy, irrespective of whatever the need, necessity, or mental derailment be, is in denial of the Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, even in the dichotomous state that it does exist today. In summing up this entire talk, we have three basic points. That the contradictory areas within the Constitution which are not in consonance with Islam, including the statutes that lean on the Constitution, have to be all reviewed, re-promulgated, re-engineered, and re-invoked. Number two, that the philosophical and ideological base of the Constitution, which represents the spirit of the Constitution, has to be upheld by making the judiciary totally independent of the executive or any other branch of the government or factors of influences, by the rich, by the feudalistic forces that do exist within the country. The final point, that the curtain which the Constitution does provide for the servants of the people to hide behind, this curtain has to be pulled down so that there is absolute transparency in the conduct of our servants within the judiciary, within the civil bureaucracy, within the army, and within amongst the parliamentarians. This status of master and servant is fundamental to our way forward, our prosperity, and the well-being of us, the people within the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, who pay the taxes to keep this roadshow going. Thank you very much.